The Tuatha De Danann had invaded Irish lands and wanted to settle on the luscious Green Island. But to win the right to remain in this land, they had to fight the Firbolgs, a proud people and a worthy adversary for the children of the goddess Danu. The Tuatha De Danann were led by King Nuada, who led them to victory. But King Nuada paid a high price and lost his right arm in a battle. This heavy blow had severe consequences for the people of the goddess Danu. The Firbolgs surrendered, and a new Tuatha De Danann kingdom was founded in Ireland. But they needed to elect a new king. Nuada was the obvious choice. However, the tradition of the sons of Danu dictated that kings were perfect men. Nuada was missing an arm, making him ineligible for the throne. Another people of this land were the Fomorians, brute beings who lived in underwater hideouts and a threat to all who tried to inhabit Ireland. They were led by the mighty Balor, the terrible one-eyed Cyclops, who could destroy any enemy with powerful lightning bolts that streamed from his sight organ. The Tuatha De Danann did not want to fight such a powerful enemy immediately after their grueling war. Therefore, they proposed that Bress, a man of mixed race, son of the goddess Eire with Elatha, a beautiful featured Fomorian prince. With this alliance between the peoples, peace reigned over Ireland. Everything indicated that choosing Bress as supreme king had been a good decision, but Bress' evil nature, inherited from the Fomorians, soon became obvious. Bress was a tyrannical and abusive king. Very high taxes were levied on gods and men. But the deity daughters of Danu suffered yet another huge humiliation. They were condemned to servitude, fulfilling tasks unworthy of divine beings. The mighty Dagda was forced to work the land with a hoe. The poet god Ogma was forced to carry lumber for the king. These two powerful gods were utterly humiliated before everyone, but they could not react. Bress was the legitimate king, chosen by the gods, and they had to submit to his will. But Ogma knew that Bress had a weak point. He hated poetry. Many people disliked it, and found the verses of the Celtic bards boring. But they could not show this annoyance to the poets, for it could arouse their wrath, leading them to craft horrific curses through their verses. The poet god Ogma sent his son Cairbre, who was also a great poet, to sing verses to Bress. Bress was greatly displeased to see a poet in his court. The king quickly interrupted the poet and told him to enjoy his castle's hospitality. Cairbre was taken to a room that looked more like a prison, where for dinner he was given porridge unworthy of the worst of criminals. The next day, Bress could not escape hearing the guest's poetry, composed especially for him. Bress, unable to endure the endless singing, and went wild, saying that the out-of-tune harp made his ears hurt, and that the sound of the bard's voice was more like the neighing of a donkey. The king had fallen into Ogma's trap, for he knew that his son would not accept such humiliation without responding. Cairbre strummed a frightening melody and sang verses that highlighted the defects of the tyrant king. Not only that, those harsh words hid a curse. Bress expelled the bard from court, but Cairbre had fulfilled his mission. Bress' beautiful face turned pale, and countless buds sprouted on his skin. The monarch's beauty was shattered by gigantic pustules. Like Nuada, Bress became an imperfect king, forced to abdicate the throne. But he did everything to hide his situation to continue to rule. But the Tuatha De Danann had to choose Bress' successor. Ogma and Dagda were ineligible, because they had been relegated to mere servants. But they had a great idea. The smithing goddess Bridget and the healing god Diane Kecht teamed up to create a new arm for Nuada. This new arm was made of silver, a work of art worthy of a king. The former king received his new arm, and from that day on, he became known as Nuada of the Silver Arm. The gods demanded Bress' resignation given his deformity, but he said he was the chosen king and would not abdicate the throne. Nuada warned him that if he did not, he would be forced to accept a duel between the two in a fight to the death to reveal the true successor in command of Ireland. But Bress balked and handed the throne to Nuada. Nuada was once more crowned king of the Tuatha De Danann, and justice again prevailed in those lands. But this peace was short-lived. Brace went to Balor, the powerful Fomorian leader, and told him how he had been betrayed by the sons of the goddess Danu. As the peace agreement between the Tuatha De Danann and the Fomorians was no longer valid, a new war was about to begin. After the fall of Brace, the tyrant king, Nuada's reign was re-established. After the return of the righteous and kind king, peace resurfaced in the Irish lands. Nuada brought prosperity, and happiness once again spread among the Tuatha De Danann. But Brace returned as a messenger from Balor, the Fomorians' powerful leader. The mouth of the deformed and deposed king uttered only spiteful and vengeful words. He brought with him the declaration of war, and so the peace between the Fomorians and the Tuatha De Danann came to an end. But the Fomorians knew that the Tuatha De Danann were worthy enemies. A brute force attack would not be enough to defeat them. Balor ordered the Fomorians to mobilize for war, but they would only leave when the entire army was armed and trained. Nuada knew that Balor was no fool, and that the war would be delayed. The Tuatha De Danann would also have time to organize for battle. Nuada led the men as king, but he needed a military chief to command the army. The mighty Dagda was the obvious choice, but there was a problem. The burly warrior and other noble fighters had been humiliated by Brace by being subjected to serfdom. This dishonor made them unworthy and ineligible for the position of army chief. But fate seemed intent on favoring the Tuatha De Danann. Gamia, a watchman at the Forest of the Sons of Danu, spotted a young warrior approaching. He was wearing clothes that identified him as a Tuatha De Danann, but the sentry did not know him. Gamia said that Nuada only allowed useful people to enter the court, and asked what talent distinguished the warrior. He said he was an excellent blacksmith and carpenter, but the watchman retorted, saying that Lukta was already a great carpenter, and there was no better blacksmith than Colum. The warrior said he was a great musician, expert on the harp, with the ability to sing finery like few others, as well as being expert in the magical arts. But Gamia retaliated again. Nuada's court had the best artists and druids. Adding another would only be yet another mouth to feed. The young man said that Nuada's court was packed with experts and men of enormous gallantry, but he doubted that there were any who had as many as he did. The watchman was intrigued and allowed him to have an audience with Nuada. Nuada was surprised to learn that there was a man in his court whose boldness led him to claim that he had countless such talents, and he wanted to know who such a person was. The warrior said his name was Lug, son of Cian of the Tuatha De Danann and Ethnu, daughter of Balor of the Dreadful Eye. His parents had married to help seal the peace between the two peoples. At that moment, several spears were aimed at him. Danu's sons feared that he was a Fomorian spy, but Lug tried to calm them down by telling them his story. Lug was Balor's grandson, and when he was born, a druid prophesied that the young man would be responsible for Balor's death, putting an end to that terrorizing reign. Upon learning of the prophecy, Balor ordered the death of his grandchildren who were born that year. But Lug's mother managed to hide the child and handed him over to be raised by a blacksmith to protect him from her fearsome father. Nuada recognized that fate might have sent the solution to his problems at his door. He therefore ordered the young man to show his fighting skills. Nuada and Lug dueled, and the king realized that Lug was one of the most proficient warriors he had ever fought. As a result, Nuada decided to appoint Lug as the new war chief of the Tuatha De Danann. After some time had passed, the Fomorians established the camp that would serve as the base for the great battles to come. To learn more about his enemies, Dagda went to the camp as an emissary under the pretext of preventing war. Dagda was met by Balor, who restrained himself from killing the visitor with his terrible eye. After all, Brace had been punished for not fulfilling the duty of hospitality, and he did not wish to make the same mistake. But Balor had a plan: to offer the guest an excellent meal. Should he not eat at all, Dagda would offend his host, and for this, he could be punished by death. A huge ditch was filled with a thick porridge made from all kinds of food. It was an absurd quantity that no one could ever devour. At least so thought the Fomorians, but they underestimated that gluttonous warrior with a large waist. After loosening his belt, Dagda began his meal. As he ate, he counted every warrior and every weapon in the camp. The Fomorians watched Dagda in disbelief. He proceeded to consume all the food in the ditch, and even ordered a drink to assist his digestion. Dagda sipped a huge barrel of beer in one gulp. That man's stomach seemed endless. The gods staggered visibly drunk and fell to the ground. The Fomorians debated whether to kill Dagda in his sleep, but they were still afraid of the great hero, even though he was passed out. To Dagda's surprise, a beautiful Fomorian named Ellen helped him up and told him she was in love with him. Dagda, even though he was a god, couldn't understand how a woman could fall in love with him after that gastronomical ordeal. But the sagacious god knew that it was pointless trying to understand the love drives of women. With her powers, Ellen helped Dagda escape from the Fomorian camp. Dagda felt extremely pleased as he reported to Nuada all that he had seen. Not because the Fomorians were gathering a powerful army, but because he had had the best meal of his life, while also getting a beautiful new lover. The great battle between the Tuatha De Danann and the monstrous Fomorians was about to begin. The tribe of the goddess Danu had divine items on their side. Goibniu was an extraordinary blacksmith, able to repair anything made of metal to perfection. Lukta was a superb carpenter, quickly repairing any broken shield and spear. But the healer Dian Kekt was the decisive element, able to mend any wound or illness and even resurrect the dead, provided the victim had not lost his head. Morrigan united with the powerful Dagda, just as she had done with Nuada in the great battle against the Firbolgs. With this, the goddess granted the robust warrior even more strength and courage to face any enemy. Feeling strengthened by the goddess of death and war, Dagda claimed that he alone had managed to slaughter a third of the Firbolg enemies. Lug, as war chief, discussed with the other warriors the last details before the conflict. They were aware of the danger posed by the enemies, but felt that fate would favor the sons of the goddess Danu. The two armies met on the plain where years ago they had fought against the Firbolgs for the right to live on the Green Island. The Fomorian army, led by Baelor of the Terrible Eye, was very powerful. The warriors coming from the underwater caves uttered intimidating war cries. The second battle of Moikchura was about to begin. The great battle started, and the two armies caused a huge bloodbath. The Tuatha De Danann fought with great bravery, while the Fomorians showed frightening verve. The warriors of the two factions battled it out. Many sons of Danu and Fomorians shed blood and dyed the green meadow with shades of red. Balor watched the carnage with pleasure, feeling that his warriors seemed to be defeating the god's offspring. Each fallen Fomorian took 2 enemy warriors with him. The first day of battle was over, and the outcome of the fighting was inconclusive. Many warriors of the Tuatha De Danann had perished. The next day promised to be even bloodier. On the second day of fighting, Dagda led the vanguard of the god's army. To Balor's disbelief, the contingent seemed undamaged even after he had seen many men die the day before. The weapons and shields were spotless, as if they had never been used. Balor was furious and ordered his army to attack at full strength, using all the warriors in reserve. It was another day of fierce fighting. As before, the Fomorians seemed to have slaughtered more enemies. But at night, the healer Dian Kekt treated all the warriors' serious injuries and revived the fallen to fight again. The next day, Lug led the troops, now superior in number, considering that virtually all the fighters had been rallied. Meanwhile, the Fomorians were fewer and fewer. On this day, the Tuatha De Danann seemed to have gotten the better of the Fomorians. The tide of war seemed to be tilting towards Danu's sons. But Brees, the deposed king of the Tuatha De Danann, told Baelor how his enemies managed to reappear unharmed to fight the next day. Together, they hatched a plan to sabotage the enemy's actions. During the night, the Fomorians made a surprise attack against the miraculous fountain used by Dienkekt to raise the dead. The Fomorians clogged the spring with huge rocks, blocking the flow of the blessed water. Radan, son of Brace, sneaked into Gyobnew's forge and stabbed the blacksmith god in the back. As Radan tried to escape from the forge, he heard Gyobnew. Even though he had been brutally wounded, he shouted at him to stop in his tracks, for he had forgotten his knife. And so the blacksmith killed Breeze's son. However, the Fomorian surprise attack overturned the Tuatha's great advantage. The next day, the Tuatha De Danann were again ready to fight. Even without being able to resurrect the fighters, King Nuada had more warriors than the Fomorians on the battlefield. Seizing this advantage would be decisive for the outcome of the war. The king therefore personally led the men on the front lines. Dagda fought like an angry bear, smashing the enemy's heads in with his powerful club. Nuada broke through the enemy lines, tearing the Fomorians apart with his divine sword. Balor was shocked at the scene. His troops were faltering in the face of an enemy they considered vastly inferior, and the gigantic Cyclops decided to act. Balor advanced against Nuada, and the fate of Ireland seemed about to be decided. Balor was tired of fighting fair and used all his power against the hero. Through his terrible eye, Balor launched a powerful lightning bolt at Nuada, who did nothing to defend himself in the face of that power. Lugh rushed to Nuada's aid, but the noble king of the Tuatha De Danann was dead. Balor, enraged, used all his power to decimate the Tuatha army. Lugh wanted to take revenge. He picked up a rock and called for Balor to face him. The monstrous Cyclops turned to him and charged his eye with enough energy to destroy any god. Lugh, using the humblest weapon, loaded the stone into the sling and waited for the right moment to deliver a perfect shot. He threw the stone with such force that, after piercing Balor's eye, it went through the back of his skull. Upon seeing their dead leader, the Fomorian army panicked and fled to the underwater caves. Breece was arrested and begged for mercy. He promised that he would pass on all his wisdom regarding agricultural knowledge. If they would spare him, the Irish cows would never deny them milk. Lugh was cheered by the people as the great hero of the Second Battle of Moytura and the exterminator of the terrible-eyed Cyclops Balor. With Nuada's death, Lugh became supreme chief of the Tuatha De Danann. Lugh guided his people to prosperity, and a bright reign began in Ireland.